Okay. Uh, okay, so it's also recording, and I've shared my screen. Uh, so today we would talk about tensile test. Arguably, this is the most important test for structural properties. Okay. Uh, and before we begin, I would like to mention this book that I believe I have mentioned already, Mechanical Metallurgy. So go find this book by Dieter, and that book actually has specific chapters on all the experiments that most of the experiments that you do in this class. Okay, including tensile tests. So I need you to pay. I need to study the chapter also. Okay, that would give you. The required exposure. So the tensile test is arguably the most important test for structural properties, is because we get the most essential structural properties also out of tensile test. So what are those properties? So at the end of the tensile test, what essentially in the tensile test that we do is we take a cylindrical bar. Okay, not which doesn't quite look like this, but this can effectively represent the situation, which would be under a tensile force, and that force per unit cross section area, that force per unit original cross section area, that is the cross section area before the beginning of the experiment. So that force per unit area is defined as the stress or the engineering stress. So that goes on the y-axis, and as the bar elongates, so its length also changes from the original value. Let's say that is L0, the original value, and gradually it expands. So let's say at a certain value of f, see this f is gradually increased. Okay, at a certain value of f, the length has increased by this much, and this increment is represented with u. uh, so the strain is defined as u by L0. Now as it is elongated, the updated length L is L0 plus u. Okay, so strain is essentially L by L0 minus 1. So that strain goes on the x-axis, and if we do that in the tensile test, the first part would be the Hookean straight line, or the linear elastic part, slope of which is the Young's modulus. So that is the first property that we get out of tensile test. Okay, so in the elastic zone we have the Young's modulus. Now here you would be doing the tensile test on mild steel, which is a ductile material and which has a very peculiar type of stress strain diagram. So this part continues, this elastic part continues, and then this linear relationship ends at something called the elastic limit. Okay, the stress value corresponding to that is called the elastic limit. So at that point, the curve is no longer linear. So until that point, the stress strain curve is essentially a straight line. But beyond that point, it's no longer a straight line, and it kind of bends. And then it sorry, not the elastic limit, I'm sorry. So that would be the proportional limit. So that's where the proportionality ends. So within the proportional limit, the stress is proportional to stress, starting from the origin. So stress is proportional to strain, that is sigma equals E times epsilon within the proportional limit. But then you hit the elastic limit. Okay, so beyond which the material is no longer elastic, and the stress strain curve continues and hits something called upper yield point. So what happens after that is, uh, after that the stress kind of falls, okay, slightly. And the stress strain curve remains mostly flat. It's actually not flat. There is a zigzag pattern or kinking uh, shape that is formed on this zone. So it is the significance of this zone is that there is no substantial change in stress. So if you look at the elastic part, there was proportional changes in stress and strain. If the strain would increase by 10%, the stress would also increase by 10%. Now you have come to a situation where the stress strain curve becomes flat. However, momentarily it becomes flat. The significance being that there is no substantial change in stress, but there is substantial change in strain happening. Okay, so strain increases enormously, whether although the stress is kind of stationary. So this zone you can refer to as the lower yield point or the yield point in general. So this phenomena is also called the yielding. Okay, and so the yielding is that very situation where there is no significant change in strain and significant change in stress, but the strain changes extensively. So beyond that point, the stress strain diagram regains some of its stiffness, and what do we have is a hardening curve. So the stress again increases further. So what we have is a hardening curve. Actually, the slope of this portion at any strain value is called the tangent modulus. Now, beyond the elastic limit, the strain is not just, strain can be divided into two parts. One is the elastic part, and the other one is the plastic part. The elastic part is, of course, stress divided by the Young's modulus. Remaining is the plastic part. What do I mean by that? That if I now try to unload from any stress value, I would be following a curve which is exactly parallel to the Hookean part. I mean, it's not exactly, but it is more or less. Yeah, it's not exactly. It's more or less parallel to the Hookean part. So by that I mean that, let's say I had originally reached to this much strain value. Let's call it epsilon star, of which I could recover this part, which I would call the elastic part of the strain. Let's call it epsilon e star. And the part that I cannot recover even after complete removal of the stress, which means I bring this force value to zero. So that part is the plastic part. Okay, so so that basically means, from this relation I know d sigma is e times d epsilon e. Okay, and the in the stress versus plastic strain diagram, uh, that actually starts over here. That actually starts at yield point, because, or that actually starts at, you can call it, let's say, the uh, elastic limit. Beyond elastic limit is when the plastic strain starts deforming. Okay, and if I draw the curve more or less like this, okay, and the slope of that curve is h. Okay, so I can say this is also h times d epsilon pl. So it can be shown that the tangent modulus is so d epsilon, which basically means d epsilon pl is 1 by h d sigma, and d epsilon e is 1 by e d sigma, which e um, basically means uh, the total strain d epsilon, which is d epsilon e plus d epsilon t pl. So the total strain is this much, which is basically 1 by h plus 1 by e times d sigma. Now, et is defined as d sigma d epsilon total, which basically means et is 1 by uh, this quantity, which basically gives this to be uh, kind of this expression. Okay, so which means since the slope of the plastic part is much smaller compared to the elastic part, which means h is much smaller than e. So et, if you look at this expression, because this quantity is much smaller than 1, it is approximately h, which basically means the slope of the stress versus total strain diagram is very close to the slope of the stress to plastic strain diagram. Now, in the stress versus total strain diagram, we hit beyond this point, we hit a maximum stress value. So first we got the Young's modulus, and the second we got the yield stress, and now we are getting the ultimate stress value or the maximum stress on the stress strain diagram. Okay, and beyond this point, the material ultimately fractures at sigma f. So beyond this point, the stress actually decrease with increase in strain. So we have seen the stress strain curve being flat, but this time it actually goes south and the stress value decreases. Okay, and ultimately the fracture happens at sigma f. So all of this you can treat them as important properties in relation to tensile test or important structural properties. Okay, now.
So I have a question.
Yeah let me
Uh,
yeah l- let me just finish my statement.
right, sir.
The situation here is that ultimately the material fractures at a strain of sigma f, which actually is less than sigma ut, and the question remains, why does a material fail at a stress smaller than the ultimate stress? Because it could achieve the ultimate stress value. Okay, but then why should it fail at a lower stress value? Okay, so that is your first assignment question, and the question is, why does material fail at sigma f, which is less than sigma ut? Yes, what is your question?
Actually, sir, at the origin, in the epsilon PL zone, you said
Yes,
that when the
yes.
yes, sir. Actually, in that zone, you said that whenever the force is removed, the material should not regain its original length. Uh, I didn't get it, sir. Actually, I was thinking that why would not it be like it is regaining its original length?
So because it's no longer elastic, the
Then which
property.
one is the means in this graph we are not showing the elastic property of this material.
Okay, okay. See, it will always come back following a slope of the elastic part. Okay. Now, if I'm somewhere on the elastic line, that means I'm well within the elastic limit. Okay. In that case, I'll simply come back to the origin. Let's say I loaded up to this point, this star point over here, and then I unload it, then I'll definitely come back to origin. Then I'll definitely regain my configuration. And that's the very definition of elasticity that you have learned. I'm not quite happy with that definition, but let's stick to that definition that the material can regain its configuration on removal of the load. Okay, and so it does if you are within the elastic limit. Why do you expect it to do the same thing when it is no longer elastic? It is supposed to have some plastic strain. It is supposed to have some permanent deformation. Permanent
Right,
in
sir.
the sense that even after removal of the load, some deformation will persist. Okay, and
Yes,
that
I got it.
happens when you go for a stress value higher than the yield stress. Okay, Is it clear now?
Yes, sir, it is clear now.
Okay. So why does the material fail at a stress uh, lower than the ultimate stress? Okay, so that's going to be one of the important questions we should be asking. And to answer that, uh, mm, so so let me tell you uh, what happens during the tensile test. Okay, so in our experiment we will be using a so-called dog bone specimen, which is a cylindrical specimen but not quite we just showed you right now. The two ends has thicker diameter, and those portions are actually would be gripped by two crossheads. So the bottom one is the fixed crosshead, and the top one is the moving crosshead. Okay, so they kind of do an iron grip on the literally the iron grip on the two ends of the specimen, and they would be pulling the specimen. So this part is going to be stationary and this part is going to be moving upwards and thereby pulling the specimen. Okay, and mm, and as they do so, the specimen would elongate. Okay, and the interesting things would start happening in this narrower region over here. Okay, so this entire narrower region, the all the interesting stuff is going to happen over there. Now, why do we make the two ends a little thicker? We could have simply taken a uniform diameter cylinder. It's because we do not want the material to fail, not outside of the uh, the part which we are observing. Okay, so this is the region which we would be observing. Okay, this is where we would be looking at. Okay, inspecting stress and strain and so on. Okay, so but what we would be doing here, uh, so if I had made an uniform cylinder, okay, let's say at the end of the experiment the fracture may have occurred over here. Okay, but that is not our test region. Okay, that is not where you can draw a free body diagram like this. Like at the two ends it is F and F. You can understand that you are applying some compressive force over here to grip this specimen over here. Okay, so the free body diagram of that portion is simply not this one. Okay, and therefore if a fracture happens, then that fracture cannot be attributed to a tensile loading. And we do try to analyze this fracture in relation to tensile loading. Okay, how do you grip a specimen? You just simply grab onto it. You simply apply compressive force. That's how you grab anything, right? So when it comes to metal, okay, a metallic rod, that force is of the order of kilonewton. So you are applying kilonewton worth of force in a lateral compression, then then that obviously is not going to give you a free body diagram like this one, two tensile forces at the two ends, you know giving you an equilibrium. That's not going to happen. So you don't want a fracture in that region, you want the fracture in your test region. So how do you ensure that the fracture happens in the test region? By making the test region weaker. By weaker I mean lower cross section. Lower cross section, same force. Let's say the pulling force is F, but then there is also a gripping force. Okay, so that pulling force over here is going to give you higher tensile stress compared to that in the large diameter portion. That's why you make the two ends larger. Okay, and what do we have here? We have one dial connected to the fixed crosset that would give you how much force is required to cause any amount of pulling. Okay, and even this portion, this entire portion, which is about 180 millimeters, this narrower diameter portion, it is about 180 millimeters. So So that's not our test region. Okay, that's not our test region, because you see, uh, just at the two sides, two ends, there is a, you know, a three-dimensional stress state going on, and this taper region, which goes from the larger diameter to smaller diameter, is kind of a transition zone. Okay, so basically that three-dimensional stress state eventually transitions into an one-dimensional stress state, which basically means that there is just uniaxial loading. This type of a free body diagram right here. Now, to have that happen within this portion, we can only use the one-third central portion of the geometry, and that is about 60 millimeters. Okay, and that 60 millimeter becomes our gauge length L0. But this 180 millimeter is our capital L0. Okay, that we would use for a different purpose. This L0, as we discussed, would be used for calculation of the strain. Okay, this gauge length would be used for calculation of the strain. Okay, and for measurement on elongation over this gauge length. You see the entire bar is elongating, but we are only interested in how much this small 60 millimeter portion is elongating. To do that, we would attach an instrument called an extensometer. So we would attach an instrument called extensometer. Okay, and that would give us the u values, the elongation values. Okay, so that you would do within this narrow, within this small one-third narrow portion, which is 60 millimeter in length. So from that you will get the elongation, and from that you will get the strain. Okay, now let's see what would happen during the elongation process. By the way, you can put your attendance in the chat. So notice what is happening. Okay, I made this simulation for you guys. Okay, so this is not downloaded from internet or anything. I made it for you. So imagine I'm plotting the stress everywhere across the length. So as you can see, that at the two ends, the stress value is actually lower. Blue means low and red means high. Okay, so blue goes through sky blue, green, yellow, orange, and ultimately goes to red. So this blue portion is representing the lowest stress, which is obvious given the fact that that is the largest diameter. Okay, and you'll notice that the specimen is also elongating. Okay, and as it elongates, you might notice the cross section is also reducing. The cross section is becoming narrower and narrower. Okay, and that effect would be even more significant when there is a significant elongation. Okay, and you can notice that in this portion, this narrow portion, the stress is actually the highest of anywhere in the geometry, and that continues. Okay, and continues, and now it has become red. That means the stress is extremely high over here. Okay, and now and just note what is happening just before the video ended. So let's say over here, okay, so this at the central portion, the reduction in the area, throughout the elongation, the area was reducing. Okay, and you know so but then at the central portion, the reduction in area is even more extreme. I hope you can follow that. So at the very central portion, the area is the narrowest. Okay, and that just happened uh, only after prolonged elongation. That didn't happen initially, but after prolonged elongation at the very central portion, the area become the narrowest. Okay, and that is the initiation of the neck. Okay, so I'll stop the video right here and go back to our whiteboard. So two things to notice here. So one thing is number one, reduction in cross section, and number two is formation of formation of a neck. So when does a neck form? So we drew the stress strain diagram, and now I'm just simplifying it. Okay, so I'm just ignoring all those part at the yielding. Okay, because it is also not general for all the ductile materials. Most ductile material would probably deform like this. So when you hit the ultimate stress value is when you start having that neck formation. Okay, uh, so the geometry kind of starts forming this shape. Okay, so okay, and the third thing to notice. Okay, so stress never reduced. If you have looked at the animation carefully or the simulation carefully, the stress never reduced. Okay, uh, the stress kept on increasing. Okay, unlike this stress strain diagram of ours, even with the the moment this cross section was started reducing, that was called the neck formation. The neck formation only happens when you go beyond the ultimate stress value. So even when you went beyond the ultimate stress value, even when the neck started forming, okay, the stress never reduced. Okay, so if you had noticed the the stress bar right there, so that was showing more and more stress. Now this stress is different from this stress right here. The one we just plotted is called the engineering stress. Similarly, the strain that we are talking about is called the engineering strain. And here we have the true stress that was being shown in that animation. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Not animation, the simulation. So, what do I mean by that? If you look at the expression for sigma engineering, that actually is your force divided by the original cross section area. But you see, as the bar was elongating, the cross section area was reducing. Okay, and why does the material do so? You see, in this entire stress strain diagram, the majority of the deformation is plastic deformation. Okay, and in plastic deformation, volumetric. Okay, so the plastic deformation is so-called incompressible. That means the volume doesn't change. That means, let's say you started with A0 and L0, okay, and after certain amount of loading, you had a new cross section area A and new length L, but then this relation should be valid. Okay, so the true stress is not based on the original cross section area. It is based on the since the bar is elongating, the L is increasing, the cross section area A must decrease because it is V by V divided by L. Because L is increasing, A must decrease, and the true stress. So that means that there is a reason for the reduction in cross section. Okay, uh, mm, and then the next thing comes when so the true stress is based on the current cross section area, so it is force divided by the current area. Okay, uh, and and why do I call this strain as the engineering strain? Because this strain is also U by L0 and not taking into account the length itself is changing. So this strain is based on the original length. So this is called an engineering strain measure. Okay, this is not the true strain. Now, to measure the true strain, I'll have to define it as a differential. Okay, a differential true strain would be a differential change in length divided by the current length, not L0. Okay, now if I integrate this quantity, I'll get the true strain, and that essentially is going to be so. So you see, L is L0 plus U. So dl is essentially du. So I can replace this du with dl and perform this integration from L0 to L. So this essentially is the natural logarithm of L to L0, which basically means ln of, as we discussed earlier, 1 plus epsilon engineering. Okay, which also means that in a tensile loading, uh, mm, the true strain is actually smaller than engineering strain. Okay, and in compressive loading, so this is in tensile. Okay, and in compressive loading, the true strain is actually higher than the engineering strain. To make a sense of that, please understand that if I take a compressive loading of -1, okay, so then I'm trying to get the natural log of 0, which is minus infinity. So if I get -1 of engineering strain in compression, that is 100% compression, okay, that in terms of true strain becomes infinite strain, minus infinity. And the opposite happens with the tensile loading, where the engineering strain is actually higher than true strain. But then the cross-section area reduces in a tensile loading. Therefore, the true stress is actually higher than the uh, engineering stress. Okay. Now, from this relation of incompressibility, I can say this is essentially F divided by A0 times L by L0, which basically means engineering stress times 1 plus engineering strain. Okay. So in that animation, we saw that the stress never reduced, stress kept on increasing, and so would happen if I were to plot the true stress and true strain beyond elastic part, which are mostly going away from the engineering stress strain. So this is the true stress strain diagram. Okay, and in that diagram, actually, you see this, as I mentioned earlier, that the true strain is actually smaller than engineering strain. So the sigma ut happens somewhere over here at a smaller true strain, and the fracture probably happens over here. Okay, both are talking about the same situation, but in terms of true stress strain and engineering stress strain. So the red one is the true stress strain, and the black one is the engineering stress strain. Okay, and since the true strain value is smaller than the engineering strain, so it is shown a little ahead of the curve. So
Sir,
yeah, let me finish. So what do we see in the true stress strain diagram is the stress actually never goes down, but what do we see? A reduction in the uh, mm, engineering stress strain diagram for the stress, fracture stress, is because if I look at mm, F, that is actually, I'm using the current cross section area A times true stress. Okay, now the true stress never reduces. Okay, but the cross section area reduces, and beyond the ultimate stress value. Okay, so these are actually two counterbalancing effects. The true stress actually increasing with strain, true strain, and the cross section area is actually decreasing with strain, or for that matter elongation. Okay, and so they are actually always acting opposite to one another. So to the left of ultimate stress, the increment in the true stress is dominant. That's why the engineering stress increases. Engineering stress is nothing but a scaled down version. So this, at the denominator there is a constant. So this is the engineering stress. So it's a scaled down version of the force itself. So you are not measuring anything else other than the force itself. Okay. So if the force reduces, so the engineering stress. Now initially the force and the engineering stress are increasing because the true stress is increasing. The cross section may be decreasing, but that effect is not significant. Okay. Once you reach the ultimate stress value is the situation where the both effects counterbalance each other equally. Okay. Hence the curve become flat. Okay. To the right of ultimate stress, actually, the reduction in the cross section is the dominant effect, and that actually causes in the reduction in the force, and hence the reduction in the engineering stress. So that's why in the engineering stress strain diagram we find a fractured stress value which is smaller than the ultimate stress value, which would not be there in the true stress strain diagram. And with the compressive stress strain, compressive engineering stress strain, okay, you see the true stress strain diagram is same for the compressive and the tensile, but it's the engineering stress strain diagram which doesn't take into account the change in length and cross section area. That's what are different. So if I were to plot the compressive engineering stress strain diagram, that is even going above the true stress strain diagram, and just for the same reason there is no ultimate stress value for uh, mm, for the neither for the true stress strain diagram or for the compressive engineering stress strain diagram. Okay. Yeah, someone was asking a question.
Sir, can you please repeat one time why epsilon true strain is less than the engineering strain and for tensile, and true strain is greater than the engineering strain for compressive, and what does signifies
Okay,
infinity
okay. One
infinity?
question at a time. One question at a time. So you can follow this thing, right?
Yes sir,
Let's say
yes sir.
if I take engineering compressive strain to be -1, engineering compressive strain to be -1, okay, which basically means 100% compression. That means the volume has been reduced to zero. The true strain expression would predict a minus infinity of strain because it is taking a natural log of zero. Okay, but the engineering strain there, I'm not talking about a physical situation. I am talking about a hypothetical situation where you are able to compress the entire volume into a flat, you know, two-dimensional object. Okay, so in that case, the strain in compression is 100%. You have 100% reduce the length, but that, in the sense of true strain, turns out to be an infinite strain. Okay, I hope this part is clear. I don't know in anything else to say that would make it even simpler. But with the tensile part, it is not quite obvious that uh, that the engineering strain would be smaller than the true strain. But you see, mm, so this expression ln 1 plus h tends to h on only when limit h tends to 0, and
Yes.
for any h greater than 0, okay, any h greater than 0, ln of 1 plus h is actually smaller than h. Okay, so for that you'll have to write down the expression for ln of 1 plus h, and that I believe is something like this: h. Now this time this is not a infinite quantity. It's a finite quantity. Okay. Then probably h squared by 2 plus h cubed by 3 and minus and so on. You see, if h is not really small, over here it is really small. When it is really small, then you would take only the first term. But if let's say it is slightly more significant than the really small quantity, so then we can take the first two quantity and the third quantity may be ignored. Okay, third quantity onwards may be ignored. Okay, so if the first two quantities are the most significant quantities, it is obvious, that h minus h square by 2 is smaller than h. Okay, so if you do not know this expression, then I would suggest study your book from what class 2. Okay, so 11th and 12th standard book, mathematics book, should give you this expression for the natural log. Okay. So yeah, so it is also obvious. Okay. You take h smaller and smaller, this h square would be even smaller, and the ln of 1 plus h would be more and more close to h. But it will still be approaching it from bottom. It is never going to approach it from top, which means it is still always be going to be smaller than h if h is positive. Okay. And the opposite is also true that we just discussed. Okay, but I hope you get the moral of the story. The only reason in the engineering stress strain diagram do we see a fall in the stress value beyond ultimate stress, that's the first assignment question, and that's what I'm trying to answer here, is because uh, the cross section is reducing and more vigorously after the ultimate stress point. Okay, so there goes my second assignment question. That is, why isn't there an ultimate compressive stress? Okay, have you written it down? Why isn't there an ultimate compressive stress? Okay. Third assignment question. When does the neck form? And for the ductile material, so the neck is a very property of ductile material. I mean, there is no way to know that a brittle material would form a neck, because the brittle materials do not survive that much of plastic strain. So let's say 10 or 15% of plastic strain may be required to cause a necking. Okay, so because brittle materials fail much before that. Okay, so there is no way to the brittle materials do not fail in with the formation of neck. So neck is a property of ductile material. And how does a neck fracture? So there would be cup and cone formed. So one portion, I do not know which one, and nobody knows, would form a hollow shape or a cup shape, and another one would form a narrow shape, which is a cone shape, and ultimately fracture like that. One more thing that we have probably discussed in the ISOD impact test, you see this area under the total area under the stress strain diagram, that actually can be used as the measurement of toughness, but in relation to quasi-static loading, where the load is being added gradually. Whereas in ISOD test, we are testing the toughness against impact load, because this area under the curve represents energy absorbed before fracture or without having fracture, but per unit volume. How do I know it is per unit volume? You see, it has to be the engineering stress strain diagram. Okay, so how do I know per unit volume? The reason I know that is because you see, this is F by A0. Okay, so this area under the curve is integration sigma d epsilon. Okay, which basically means 1 by A0 L0, the original volume, times, or the volume itself, the volume times integration f du. Okay, so this basically means amount of work done on the material per unit volume, or the energy spent on the material per unit volume to cause the fracture, which essentially is a measurement of toughness. But this one is a quasi-static measure of toughness, because you see the load is being applied gradually. If it were an impulse loading, then we would be having the impulse toughness that we and that would be more in relation to ISOD impact test. Okay, I don't think I have many more things to add. Acha, one more thing, just one more thing. Okay. See, if the stress strain diagram kind of looks like this one and not like milestone one, where the yield stress is very distinct, very clearly visible, that the stress strain diagram becomes flat at that region, and you can definitely identify the yield stress. If it is something like this where you cannot clearly identify an yield stress, then this is what you can do. You can take the smallest uh, plastic strain amount of your choice, and the standard practice is to take 0.002 or 0.2% of plastic strain, and draw a line parallel to the elastic part of the curve. Okay. So draw this line right here, and wherever that line intersects with the engineering stress strain diagram, that we would call something called the proof stress. Okay, and proof stress can be used as a measurement of yield stress. Now, what is the logic behind this? You see, the yield stress is the stress value at which the plastic deformation starts. Now, that very statement has two meaning. Number one is that at yield stress, the plastic strain value should be zero. Number two is because that's when the plastic deformation starts. So obviously the plastic strain should be zero. And the number two is that yield stress is the highest value of the stress without a plastic strain, without a with a zero plastic strain. You see, you can look at any point on the elastic part of the curve. It doesn't have a plastic strain, but that doesn't qualify for the yield stress. Yield stress is supposed to represent the initiation of plasticity, and therefore it has to be the highest stress value with zero plastic strain. But then how can you detect something with a zero plastic strain? Okay, then you would be end up detecting any point on the elastic part of the stress strain diagram. So that's why you need a finite that is non-zero but very small value of plastic strain for detecting the representative within quotes yield stress value. And proof stress is that representative yield stress value, and that tiny value of plastic strain that you take is 0.002, and draw this parallel line, this line parallel to the elastic part of the curve. What is the significance of this line? That if you were to unload from the proof stress, you'd follow this line, okay, in reverse. So you drew it first with the 0.002 intercept on the x-axis, and then drawing a line parallel to the Hookean part of the curve. And this time we are talking in reverse. If you were to unload from proof stress, after complete unloading of the stress, you'd arrive at this point on the x-axis or the strain axis, where you'd have 0.002 or 0.2% of plastic strain that you could not recover even after removal of the complete load. Okay, so proof stress corresponds to 0.002 of plastic strain. That way, I think I'm done with everything I had to discuss with the theory part of it. Unless you have any question, we can move on to the today's video lecture. I mean the experimental part of it.
No, sir, we do not have a question.
Yeah, I understood. I'm just searching for the video.
Yes, right, sir.
Okay, so can you see this screen right here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Acha. Uh, so so what you see over here is that extensometer, that instrument that you are talking about, that is the one with two dials. Okay. So this is our next assignment question. Why does the extensometer has two dials, or why do we need two dials in the extensometer? Please write it down. Why do we need two dials in the extensometer? Okay. And the next question is, what is the name of the machine? That means this big machine right here. Okay. So the extensometer is attached to the specimen. Okay. So that narrow diameter portion of the specimen, the extensometer is attached with a 60 millimeter gauge length. Okay. Uh, so um, hmm, and the top green portion is the moving crosset, and the bottom green portion right here, okay, is the fixed crosset. And how do you tighten those crosset is through this rotating handles. Can you see the the two rotating wheel right here? Can you see the rotating wheel? I mean the wheel that can be rotated.
Yes, sir.
So that is the one you can rotate to tighten tighten the crosset across the larger diameter portion of the specimen. Okay. So what is the name of this machine where we are doing the tensile test? So there is a tiny instrument that is measuring this elongation, that is the extensometer. But then this whole thing has been this moving and fixed crosset that are part of a bigger machine in which the experiment is being done. So the next assignment question is, what is the name of that machine? Okay. So I believe I asked you 4 or 5 assignment question. Okay. I cannot seem to remember any more. Okay, but I think this many would be sufficient. Okay. So let's watch the video, and after watching the video, if you have any further queries, that we can discuss. So watch this video. I'm just turning my microphone off. Good afternoon, students. My name is Siddharth Patra. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, and today we will be doing tensile test in this instrument. This one is called universal testing machine. If you are not already familiar with this machine, this machine can perform various type of tests. Hence the name universal testing machine. For example, you can perform a bending test over here by putting a beam sort of a structure simply in a simply supported fashion, and then we can load it over here. So few things about this instrument over here. There is a fixed crosset and there is a moving crosset. So in which the tensile test will be done between these two crossets. So the specimen would be fixed to would be attached to both the fixed crosset and the moving crosset, and then the fixed crosset would remain stationary and the moving crosset would stretch the specimen. So in this case, the specimen is a cylindrical specimen. We'll show you that specimen in a minute. So that can be pulled down using the moving crosset, and thereby the specimen will be under tensile load. And the two important things that we are supposed to measure here is the amount of elongation versus the amount of force applied, or the vice versa. Now this machine is run by a hydraulic system. So you can see all the circuitry over there, and this is the controller. This is where you can control the amount of elongation or amount of loading, and you can also read the data from here. So for example, you can get the reading of how much force that is being applied over here from this dial. Okay, and also you can adjust the maximum. So the unit of force is in kilonewton. Okay, so right now it has been at is it cubic meter? 0.5 or 0.5? Okay. So it is the least count, right? So so this one is the least count, 0.5 kilonewton, and the maximum value of the force is 100 kilonewton. Okay, and this can also be changed using this handle over there. And for example, now it has been changed to 20 kilonewton, the maximum value, and the least count being 0.1 kilonewton. Okay. Okay. And this one is again another scale with maximum value of 200 kilonewton and the least count being 1 kilonewton. So as you might notice in this dial there are two pointers. Okay, uh, the two pointers. So, so there are two pointers. Okay. So the one that is currently moving, the one which was initially stationary, there is a that is used. Yeah. So the one that is moving, okay, right now. Okay. So that when that moves towards the in the clockwise direction, that actually pulls the one that was initially stationary. But then when the moving one moves towards the left, the stationary one becomes the second hand becomes stationary at that location. That means that gives you the maximum value of the force in the entire loading period. Okay. And that maximum value actually ultimately gives you the ultimate tensile stress. So there are two hands in the dial. One of them is for showing the instantaneous load value. The other one is for showing the maximum load value in the entire loading cycle. Okay. So now the specimen would be attached, and this is the specimen. This is called a dog bone specimen. It's a cylindrical specimen. Okay, and the total total length is about 350 millimeter. Okay, and you might notice that the diameter of this part is slightly higher than this part. This one is about 10 millimeters and this one is about 12 millimeters. Okay, and this 10 millimeter diameter portion is about 160 to 180 millimeters. Okay, so that is kind of the effective length of the specimen, and these two sides of the specimen which has the higher diameter, that is where the specimen would be held by the fixed and the moving process. Okay, that's why it would be attached. The reason for making the two ends slightly higher diameter is that to ensure that the failure, when the material actually fails, the failure occurs in the central portion where the diameter is the lowest. So as you can see, this portion over here, this one is the lower diameter portion, and this lower diameter portion is our test region, and that, as I mentioned earlier, that is about 160 to 180 millimeters. And the two portions that are inside the two crossheads are that higher diameter portion. And as you may have noticed earlier, there is a taper between the higher diameter and the lower diameter. That actually is there for in order to avoid any amount of stress concentration. And the reason for making the higher diameter portions at the two ends is because we want to have, since this one is our test region, we want to have any type of activity, including any change in the shape or any fracture happening within this test region. And the way to ensure that is that this remains the lowest diameter region. This is uniform, of course,
with a certain amount of approximation. Uh, but that is the lowest diameter in the entire segment. And this instrument over here, this is an extensometer. Okay, this is a spring-loaded extensometer, mechanical type. So the way it is attached to the specimen is by by pulling it. So it is spring-loaded. You can make the gap higher by pushing it. Okay, and then we would place the specimen in the gap between these two. So uh, these uh, these two rods are over there to ensure the gauge length. The gauge length is the gap between this knife edges, this knife edge. I hope you can see this one, this small knife edge over here, and this knife edge over here. And that gap in this case is 60 millimeters. And of course, you can move these two knife edges higher and make any different gauge length. But for this one, we have set it to be 60 millimeters. So 60 millimeter is our gauge length. Now I have mentioned three lengths. One is the total length of the specimen, that is about 350 millimeters. Okay, and this effective length, which is the 10 millimeter diameter portion, and in that 10 millimeter diameter portion also, we are only taking a very small segment of 60 millimeters. Now, reason for doing that would be that from the higher diameter, that is the 12 millimeter diameter portion to 10 millimeter diameter portion, there is a taper region, and in that the stress state becomes three-dimensional. Okay, and it needs to have a smooth transition from three-dimensional to one-dimensional stress state. And actually, the test that we are doing, okay, that is suitable for uniaxial stress state. So we are doing an analysis with uniaxial stress state. To ensure uniaxial stress state happens in the region of the bar, we are supposed to take 1/3 of the total length. Now the total length is about 180 millimeters, around 160 to 180 millimeters. So we will be taking only 1/3 of that length in the middle of the rod, which would be around 60 millimeters, and that's why we attach the extensometer. The list count for the extensometer, you might notice, is 0.01 millimeter. Okay. Now, how does the extensometer work? You see, when this one being spring loaded, when we attach the extensometer to the specimen, these two knife edges are actually in static friction with the surface of this rod or the dog bone specimen. And as the dog bone specimen elongates, the gap between these two knife edges also elongates. And how does that happen? You see, as this knife edge is these two lower knife edges, as they go down, okay, as the moving process pulls the bar, the lower knife edges go down, and as they do so, they would push the reading on these two dials. Okay, they would push under these two these two dials. So therefore, you will see the reading of the elongation from this dial. Okay, and that's how the elongation is measured. Okay, and okay, so the thing is, so why do we need two dials over here? The thing is, it's a possibility that even with the extensometer attached to the bar, okay, one of the knife edges might lose contact, might not be in static friction with the might be in contact but not in static friction with the bar itself. Okay, and some slip may occur, and because of that slip, okay, one of the dials, and we do not know which one, okay, would not probably give you the correct result. Okay, of course there is a chance of both of them not giving you correct result. But then in order for this to be attached to the bar, which is only by means of friction, okay, one of the knife edges must work. Okay, so so there is a possibility that both of them would show you correct result, or at least one of them would show you more or less the correct result. So so while reading the data, if let's say one of them tells you it is 0.5 millimeter of elongation, the other one tells you 0.48 millimeter, then we can take the average of that. But if one tells you that it's a 0.5 millimeter of elongation, the other one tells you it is 0.25, you are supposed to ignore the smaller value. Okay, that's how we work with the extensometer. Now this extensometer would be attached to this rod over here. Okay, and then then this this moving crosshead would be pulled downwards, and it would in a way stretch this bar over here, and therefore we would get the elongation data from the extensometer. Okay, and similarly we will get the value of the force from this dial over here. Not only that, here we would be actually plotting a graph. Okay, so as the loading happens, we would also be generating a graph. So the y-axis is basically the load in kilonewton. You see the maximum value is 100 kilonewton, and the x-axis, so it would be rolling in this way. So the x-axis would be your elongation. Okay, so the load versus deflection curve we will also generate from this through this graph as well. So now we'll attach the extensometer. So right now what we just did was we adjusted the current reading of the extensometer to 0 for both the dials. Okay, so we get the measurement from 0 itself. Otherwise, we would have to subtract. Okay. Now the extensometer would be attached to the specimen. Okay. So here I have the instruction sheet, and the specifications of the test have already been written down over here. So, so first thing is the full length of the rod that I just mentioned. That is about 350 millimeters, and then the effective length we already discussed what that is. That is the region with the 10 millimeter diameter. So diameter is not exactly 10 millimeters. So you can see we have taken reading at angular orientation, and from that we are taking an average, and here we have listed down the extensometer gauge length. Now so many lengths are there, and I just tell you that which one is important when we would be measuring the strain. because you see the uniaxial stress state is only there in the 1/3 of the total effective length, okay, which is 165 millimeters. So in that 1/3, that is the 60 millimeter gauge length, is where we would measure the strain. So so the deformation that you would note over here on these two extensometer dials are the deformations over that gauge length. So essentially, in order to measure the strain, you would simply divide that value, that extension, with the gauge length, which is 60 millimeters, to get the value of the strain. Now there are some specifications with regard to the machine that we are working on, which is an universal testing machine, maximum capacity of 200 kilonewton, which we just showed you, and then these are the specification of the extensometer. So the range of working of the extensometer is 0 to 5 millimeter. Okay, so so once the deformation goes beyond 5 millimeter or tends to go beyond that value, you cannot use this extensometer, and the least count is 0.01 millimeter. Now there are some other details over there. So these specifications must be there in your instruction sheet. Then we will be taking the reading. Okay. So this is there are some discussions over here, some of the experiment steps that are mentioned over here, and here are the procedures. Okay. And there would be some questions for you to answer in the end. But before that, this is the segment where you take the experimental data. While doing the experiment, you are supposed to note down the data over here. And from that data, you are supposed to calculate various things. For example, the value of the load, that is the actual force in kilonewton, while you reach the yield point, or what is the maximum value of the load, and other things. And from that, you will calculate the stress value at the yield point, the ultimate stress value, that is the maximum load divided by the cross-section area, percentage elongation, and several other things. So here you see, one important information is mentioned, which is percentage elongation. Percentage elongation is a measurement of the ductility of a material, given material. What does that mean is the length before elongation, okay, and comparison between length before elongation and length after elongation. Okay, so the percentage increase in the total length. Now you see, once this specimen is loaded, and then gradually to extend, and after certain value of stress, it would actually break. So this is a destructive test. Okay, and so once the broken pieces are assembled, okay, we can measure what is the total change length. Now this total change length would not be measured about the full length. It would be, it's not about 350 millimeters. It would be based on the effective length. You see that the higher diameter portion, the 12 millimeter higher diameter portion, which is inside the two crossets, that barely extends beyond the elastic point. But in the middle region, which is 10 millimeter diameter, that has substantial amount of plastic deformation, and that's where we want to focus. So when we will be measuring the percentage elongation, that is based on your effective length. And that is also not based on your extensometer gauge length. So the extensometer gauge length is there for measurement of the strain, but for the measurement of the percentage elongation, we would be using the effective length. Okay. So here we have already preset some of the load values, okay, because we already have the load data from the dial over there. So we can directly note the corresponding reading of the extensometer, left and right, and eventually taking the averages. Okay, and ultimately here are these columns are for you to do the calculations. Okay, the stresses, strains, and ultimately calculation of the Young's modulus from the the ratio of the stresses and strains, and then average Young's modulus, and so on. Several calculations are there. But one more thing. As I mentioned earlier, the working length of this extensometer is up to 5 millimeters. From 0 to 5 millimeters of elongation, we can use this extensometer. Now, as you might know, that the material has substantial elongation in the plastic region. Let's say if you are testing a ductile material, and then in the plastic region, it will have several times higher elongation than in the elastic region. Okay. And when does the plastic region starts, or when does the plastic deformation starts? It starts beyond the yield point. Now, what is an yield point? An yield point is a stress value at which with smaller increase in stress, there is a substantial increase in strain, or the gradient of the stress or the rate of stress is much smaller. So the stress strain diagram is kind of flat in the 8 point. So there is the Hookean part, which is a linear part, then it becomes gradual, becomes flat for a small domain, and after that it starts developing stresses further. So the first region is the elastic region, then comes the yield point, and then comes your hardening region. Hardening is the region where the material regains its original stiffness. Okay, so the material is most stiff in its elastic region, and the stiffness kind of momentarily, I shouldn't be using the temporal term, it becomes or the slope becomes flat at the vicinity of the yield point, and after that it again regains some of its stiffness, and that is the hardening portion where the curve again increases, the stress again increases. So now the thing is, we don't want our extensometer, which is a very delicate instrument, we do not want it to be subjected to plastic deformation. So so we only want to use this extensometer up to the yield point. So this instrument is there only for measuring the elastic strain. And once we know we have hit the yield point, we will remove the extensometer, and beyond yield point, we are not taking any measurement of the strain. We cannot, because we have already removed the extensometer. But we can still have the load be recorded from the dial, and therefore we can get the yield point or maximum load value or the break load. Again, what is the maximum load? We have shown two hands in the dial that gives you the force value. One that gives you the instantaneous load value, the other one gives you the maximum load value across the entire loading cycle. So that maximum load value is what you are supposed to write here. This says maximum load, and from that you are supposed to calculate the ultimate strength. And then at the breaking point also, that means when the material fractures, so the final stress value is the breaking point. So that you are also supposed to note. Okay, so that's with the extensometer, that's with the instruction sheet over here, and now we can directly proceed for the experiment.
One five. Five.
3, 2,
7.5.
4, 3,
10.
5, 4,
12.5.
5.5, 4, 5,
15.
7, 5,
17.5.
8, 6,
20.
9, 8,
22.5.
10, 9,
25.
11, 9.5,
27.5.
12,
ঘুরে যাচ্ছে, ঘুরে গেলে বলবে ইল করে গেছে 2750।
12, 10.
দুটো জিনিস বলে দিই। একটা হচ্ছে ভিডিওটাতে কখন আমরা এক্সটেন্সোমিটারটা রিমুভ করব। সো নোটিস দ্যাট ভেরি কেয়ারফুলি when the extensometer would be removed, and that has already been mentioned in the discussion part of it. I mean, not even in this video. So so that part is there. And number two is, at the end of this video, there is a slow motion shot of the actual necking forming within the specimen, okay, and ultimately leading to fracture. Okay, so we have seen that in the simulation, but while the shooting of this video was going on, I made sure that we had a slow motion video. So and so I specifically mentioned that we should shoot a slow motion video, so for you to look at the uh, how the necking process happens. Okay, so do pay attention to these two things. One is when the extensometer is removed, and the slow motion video of the necking.
কথা খুলে নিচ্ছি।
দাদা খুলো না একটু দাদা।
হ্যাঁ, এই যে রান করছে, হ্যাঁ এইটা
হ্যাঁ, এই করে গেছে।
এই যে করছে ঘুরছে,
এইখানে
ঠিক আছে, এবার ওইটা তুলবে।
So right now we have reached the yield point, and as you can see, we are developing rapid extension.
এই যে yield point.
Beyond this point, you will not be attaching the extension. So the yield point value is 27.5 kilonewton. So from that you are supposed to calculate the stress.
কাটাই দেখলাম।
And this is what is marked as the yield point, where the curve has momentarily become flat. And now it is going for the maximum stress value or the maximum load value.
ভাঙছে।
So the maximum load value is
37
37.
না 37 কি করে 30 35 35
36. 36. 36 kilometer. And the braking load is
3250
so this is where we have reached the maximum load value. Okay, and after that the spontaneously the material goes for failure. Okay, as we apply more and more elongation, the load for doesn't increase further and decreases from this point and ultimately causes a fracture. Now this load, this is where the fracture happened. This jerk shape happened where the fracture happened, and after that the load obviously becomes zero because there is the material has already broken and it cannot sustain any further load. This is the broken specimen. Okay. And as you can see, it forms the famous cup and cone shape. So this one is a cone, and there you can see this hollow cup forming inside inside this rod. Okay. Ideally, the necking should happen in the middle of the specimen. Now, what is necking? While we are continuously loading beyond the maximum load value or the ultimate stress value, somewhere within the along the length of the rod, that means that this uniform 10 millimeter diameter portion somewhere you are supposed to see the rapid reduction in the cross section. Obviously, because of the elastic and plastic deformation, cross section was gradually reducing, but somewhere you would see rapid reduction and eventually leading to failure. Okay. Now, the amount of reduction in the cross section is actually an indication of the ductility of the material. If the material is perfectly ductile, this portion would actually end at a point. But as you can see, it has not. So this has certain amount of brittleness into it. Also, one more problem. Ideally, if we do, let's say, a finite element simulation in ANSYS or Abacus, there you would see that that region where the cross section reduces to minimum, that happens exactly in middle of the rod. Okay, but in this case, as you can see, it has happened at a end. Okay, actually closer to the taper region. Okay, so so it's still in the 10 millimeter diameter region, but closer to one of the ends. Okay, so this has happened obviously because it's not perfectly cylinder, it's not uniform everywhere, because you see it has been prepared through turning, and in turning usually the middle region has the higher diameter. And so in this case what we have obtained is the maximum load we have obtained is around 55.5 kilonewton. Okay, so it has gone past 50 and then 10 marks, that is 50.55 and then another mark, so 11 marks. So 55.5 kilonewton is the maximum load, and from the cross section area you can find out what would be the ultimate tensile strength. Okay, so okay, so the breaking point was around 32.5 kilonewton, and we have written down the information after the experiment. For example, the length after breaking is 194 millimeter. You might recall the original length was 165 millimeter, and after breaking the length has become 194 millimeter. Okay. So, so what length are we talking about? We are talking about the effective length, the length of the 10 millimeter portion. Okay, so that has changed from 165 to 194, and from that you can figure out how much is the percentage elongation. Both percentage elongation and the reduction in cross section is a measurement of the ductility of the material. The more the material is ductile, the higher will be the reduction in the cross section, and higher will be the change in the length. Okay. And also we have generated this graph, okay, that shows you the value of the load versus the elongation. Okay. So that is there, and we have this this broken specimen over here, and this is your instruction sheet over there. So we have written down all the data that you require, and on this side we have noted down the values of the different deflections from the load. So there are two columns. So in one of them we have noted down the left dial of the extensometer, on the other one the right dial, and this way we got the elongations within the elastic limit. And as soon as we encountered 27.5 kilonewton, we realized that we have hit the yield point. Yield point is where the extensometer dials show rapid change in the reading, although the load is only gradually changing. So that this flat region in the curve is manifested when we are doing the experiment. That flat region is manifested through such behavior. So that point is known as the yield point. And after that we have noted down the maximum load and also the breaking load.
Okay, so Do you have any further queries?
স্যার,
Yes.
স্যার ওই যে যেই গ্রাফটা আপনি দেখালেন, হুম,
Mhm.
ওই গ্রাফটাতে যখন মানে ওইখানে কি মানে যখন আমি টেস্ট করছি ওই যে তারপরে যখন যখন ভেঙে গেল ব্রোক মানে ভেঙে যাওয়ার পর ওটা আবার কি ইনিশিয়াল পজিশনে চলে আসছে?
ওটার ইনিশিয়াল পজিশনে আসার কোনো ব্যাপারই নেই, ঠিক আছে?
আচ্ছা।
কারণ ধরা যাক একটা মেটেরিয়াল, okay, so if you are doing an elastic unloading, you come to the
হ্যাঁ।
origin, okay? So
হুম।
if you are unloading from the plastic part of the car, you don't
হুম।
completely regain the configuration, you partially regain the configuration. So that much regaining or the that much retraction is the elastic deformation. The rest is plastic. The part that remains is plastic. But when the material has fractured, okay, there
হুম।
is no question of returning to anything. It has simply fractured. The material is broken. Okay.
হ্যাঁ স্যার।
So,
ইয়েস স্যার।
so you can think of the two broken parts individually would, after breaking, would possibly, be slightly contracting, and that
ওকে।
is the elastic part of the deformation. Because even when the material was going through fracture, as long as the material was intact, there was some force through it, and that force would be causing certain amount of elastic deformation. So the moment the specimen was broken into two parts, each part would be having slight contraction, very tiny, it's extremely insignificant contraction. Typically, the order of magnitude of elastic strain is 1 in 1000 or 10 to the power minus 3. So for a 60 millimeter gauge length of the specimen, that would be 0.06 millimeter. So it's extremely tiny, and yeah, that contraction has happened, but that to individual broken specimen, and there is no way for the instrument to determine. Okay.
নো স্যার, আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি সে কারণে জিজ্ঞেস করিনি আসলে। ওই যখন গ্রাফটা ওখানে ক্রিয়েট হলো, দেন স্যার যখন ওই মানে আবার যখন দেখালেন তখন ওই পোর্শনটা দেখাচ্ছিলেন টর্শন, যেখানে ফ্র্যাকচারটা হচ্ছে ওই পোর্শনটায় দেখছিলাম। এবার ফলে কি হয়েছে স্যার, যখন ওই গ্রাফটা ক্রিয়েট হচ্ছে ওই পেনটা নিচে চলে এসেছিল, তো ওই ওই জায়গাটা আমি ফলো করতে পারিনি। না সেটাই হওয়ার কথা না, এটা কেন হলো সেজন্যই জিজ্ঞেসটা করলাম।
So when the fracture happens, actually,
হ্যাঁ।
because of the jerk, okay, when the
ওকে।
specimen breaks, it creates a
হুম।
jerk, and because of that, there is a zigzag pattern formed by the uh,
হুম।
mm, pain right there. Okay, but that doesn't
ওকে।
mean anything returns to. I mean, the specimen has broken, nothing to return to
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
original
হ্যাঁ।
configuration.
ওকে ওকে
Okay.
ওকে স্যার।
Number two,
হুম।
uh, before I mean during the discussion part, I didn't mention about percentage elongation and percentage
হুম।
reduction in cross section, but I did discuss that in the experimental part. So yes, in your report, you are also supposed to calculate the percentage elongation, percentage reduction in the cross section. So percentage elongation is এখন আবার কে জয়েন করছে ওই দেখো। So percentage elongation is as we discussed is the measurement of ductility of the material. The more higher the percentage of elongation, higher is the ductility. So that percentage elongation would be measured on not small L0 but capital L0. Okay, so you see that 165 millimeter of the 10 millimeter dia portion of the dog bone specimen, that entire length, the percentage elongation would be calculated on this one, not the 60 millimeter gauge length portion. That's where the strain would be calculated. So for percentage elongation, what we do is we measure the original length. Let's say that is 165 millimeter, and after the fracture, we join the two broken specimen and we measured that um narrow region, uh, from the end of taper to the beginning of taper. Okay, that portion. So let's say that is L. So divided by L0 times 100. Okay, so that's our percentage elongation. And for percentage reduction in cross section, we need to measure the narrowest portion of the area. Okay, at the necking. So let's call it AN. So for percentage reduction in cross section, what we do is we take the original cross section area, subtract. So because the original cross section area is the larger quantity, subtract the narrowest part of the neck and divide with A0 and then multiply with 100, and that gives us the percentage reduction of cross section. So both are measures of ductility. Higher the value, higher is the ductility. That's the idea. Okay, so these two things I forgot to mention. Okay, so your assignment question, last assignment question is, when was the extensometer removed in the tensile test and why? When was the extensometer removed in the tensile test and why? Okay, I think I have answered that in that experimental part of the video. Okay, so that is your last assignment question.
Sir, I have another question.
Yes.
When the material is broken, then former shape of the broken side, broken tip is in, and this is a particularly shape you ask in the video. So, sir, this is the typical shape. The form is the necessary. It is the necessary shape to form on every case.
You see, you are talking about the cup and cone shape.
Yes, sir.
Our specimen formed the cup and cone shape for fracturing because what we used was a ductile material. And if it is a true ductile material, of course, what is a true ductile material even at room temperature? So I'm not going into the temperature debate, but let's say at room temperature, whether or not a given composition of iron and carbon and other alloying elements, is it ductile or not? That depends on a lot of factors, and one of them being the composition, the other of them being whether or not it is in its equilibrium phase. That means has it been heat treated, has it been like heated to a high temperature and then quenched to retain a particular phase, let's say a martensitic phase or something. Okay, so that depends, or whether or not the material is cold rolled. Okay, so let's say after uh, you know taking the after being mm, uh, I don't know, maybe cast and then being cold rolled or something. So whether such things has happened, so whether stress induced or temperature induced phase transformation has happened or not, that is important. Okay, and in presence of such, the material could behave in a brittle way, but if I mean, even a material which according to its composition should be a ductile material might behave in a brittle way. But let's say it is not the case, then it is both in composition and in microscopic phase. I hope you understand what are microscopic phases. So it's in austenitic phase, so it's a ductile material. So if it is a ductile material, so chances are it would have substantial plastic deformation, and chances are it would fail with the formation of a neck, and the neck fails with the formation of a cup and cone. Similar shape we saw in for the the aluminum specimen when we did the ISART test. Okay, so that's the typical way of ductile material fails. Okay, but let's say if it is not retaining the correct phase for a ductile material, if it fails, let's say at a 5% plastic strength, or if it is mostly a brittle material, it would probably not be failing with the formation of a neck or a cup and cone.
Okay, sir. Sir,
Yes.
sir, when I when I hold the material test piece on the device, and when I read the main dial scale, where the graph is plotted. Which machine is this, sir? Actually, I missed this. Sir, can you specify that?
No, I didn't get the question. What's your question?
স্যার অ্যাকচুয়ালি কোশ্চেনটা হচ্ছে, যখন আমরা দেখছি স্যার মেন যে মেশিনটা আমরা ওটা সেট করলাম এবং যেখানে ওই মানে গ্রাফটা প্লট হচ্ছিল, ওই ফুল সেটআপটা ওই একটা তো মেশিন স্যার, ওইটা যেমন এক্সটেন্সোমিটার, ওইটা স্যার হয়তো বলেছেন, আমি মানে মনে করতে পারছি না ওইটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি মেশিনটা কি মানে ওই মেশিনটার নামটা কি?
হুম এটা
UTM
এটার জন্য আমি সাজেস্ট করবো যে একবার রেকর্ডিংটা আরেকবার ভালো করে দেখো।
ওকে স্যার,
It was called an UTM. UTM stands for Universal Testing Machine.
ওকে
And
ওকে,
why
হ্যাঁ
universal? That part has also been explained in the video.
ওকে স্যার, ওকে স্যার, হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, মনে পড়েছে এখন। ওকে স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
Any other questions?
স্যার আপাতত তো একবার ভিডিওটা দেখবো আমি, দেখে যদি স্যার কিছু থাকে আপনাকে একবার জিজ্ঞেস করবো ক্লাসরুমে।
না, আমি বাকিদের বলছি, বাকিদের কোনো কোশ্চেন নেই। Okay then. So I think after this we would be meeting for a Viva. Okay, we are not meeting before a Viva. I think my part of the syllabus is covered. Okay, are the classes going on for the parallel sessions? That means are you doing classes with Professor Lohar and Professor Kormukar?
ওকে স্যার।
No, my question is, are you
No, sir.
do you have the classes?
no sir
নো স্যার, নো স্যার, নো স্যার।
Till
আমি
now
অলরেডি আই এম কন্ট্যাক্ট উইথ স্যার কর্মকার স্যার, স্যার asking স্যার confirm to start the class from next Tuesday.
Okay.
মানে এই স্যারের কাছে বোধহয় ভিডিও গুলো এখনো ওরকম ভাবে কালেক্ট করা নেই, তো স্যার একেবারে গুছিয়ে নিয়ে উনি আমাদের ক্লাসটা নেবেন বলেছে।
ভিডিওগুলো আমি সমস্ত ক্লাস টিচারের সঙ্গেই শেয়ার করে রেখেছি, তো
Okay, okay.
তো আই থিঙ্ক
হয়তো ওনার কাছে হয়তো গোছানো নেই, ওনাকে বলেছেন, বললেন ঠিক আছে আমি করবো।
so if you ever talk to him, you can mention that I have shared the videos with everyone.
ওকে ওকে ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ।
Everyone in our with I mean, every one of our teachers. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, so
আমাদের স্যার গ্রুপ 2 এর বোধহয় ক্লাস নেবেন কর্মকার স্যার, আর এ এর বোধহয় 1 এর বোধহয় ক্লাস নেবেন স্যার লোহার স্যার।